if you're homeless, or if you're worried that you're about to become homeless, or your living situation is kind of temporary, you're sleeping on someone's couch, and you're really wondering about your future and where you're going to be living long term, then I'd really like to remind you of something, and that is that you're not alone. There are over 100 million people in the world who are homeless. So there's many, many people who are homeless. You're absolutely not alone in this. And there's hope. There's absolutely hope that you can go on to have a home, that you can go on to have a regular source of food, that you can have clothing, you can have all these things. There's hope for you to have all those things. And I want to talk about that here in this video. So I want to kind of drill down and talk about a specific example of somebody who was homeless with his young son and was able to kind of, overcome his circumstances and go on to lead a very happy and successful life. And that man's name is Chris Gardner. And so I want to talk about what kind of distinguished Chris and what was able to help him kind of break free from homelessness and rise above his circumstances. So something important to think about with when I think of Chris is that Chris never let his circumstances get him down. So he realized that homelessness was something that was temporary. This didn't define who he was as a person. It didn't mean that he was a nobody or something like that. This is just a temporary thing. This is a blip on the radar. This is something that's difficult, but this too shall pass. He was determined that he was going to get out of that situation, and he believed in himself. He had good self-esteem. He believed that, hey, I'm a human being, and someday I'm going to get out of these circumstances. It's just a question of doing the right steps and to move forward. And so what he did was he got a job. Now, it was a low-paying job. It wasn't a great job. It was something that a lot of people might have scoffed at. But you know what? You have to start somewhere. You have to start with something. So if you're looking at, let's say, a job at McDonald's, and you're thinking, well, this is ridiculous. I don't want to work at fast food, or the pay is just too low. You have to start with something. And that doesn't mean that you have to work at McDonald's for the rest of your life. But if you're homeless, then you're going to need some income right now if you're going to eventually get a home and a steady source of food, clothing, and so forth. You're going to need to support yourself, and that can be very difficult in a bad economy. So sometimes you just have to take what job you can get, however low paying it is, and then try and create an opportunity out of that. And you can do that by outworking the other people around you. So maybe you get that job at McDonald's, but you work exceptionally hard, harder than anyone else there, and you end up getting promoted. And then you become the assistant manager, and now you're making a little bit more, and it's still not perfect, but then you get promoted again. So what happens is that you're building a track record of success. You're putting some income in the door. You're able to feed yourself, and eventually you'll have enough money where you can put a down payment on an apartment or something like that. You can go ahead and you have this source of income, but it's also going to help your self-esteem, that you're working and you're feeling like you're contributing. You'll feel a lot better about yourself, and you're building a track record of success. You're putting together a resume. You're getting some wins in, and you're really opening up the door to something new. Now, with this outworking, you might have to work 2 full-time jobs. You might have to work 2 jobs. You might have to work 3 jobs, but you have to do whatever it takes in order to get that income to be self-sufficient. And Chris was able to do that. He was the first person in the office and the last one to leave. And another thing that Chris never neglected was that you have to eat. Even if you don't have any money or you have that low-paying job, you need to be healthy. You need to be getting enough nourishment that you're not sick or having problems and needing to go to the hospital. And you can get that. You can get that from soup kitchens, or another very important source of food, if you're homeless or you just don't have a lot of money, is called a pantry. So if you look up that word pantry, if you can just get to a library that will give you free internet access, and then you do a Google search with the name of your town that you live in plus pantry, and then you can go ahead and find some opportunities where you can get some food. All right, and in larger cities, they'll have multiple pantries, and a pantry might be part of it. It could be part of a church. It could be part of a school. Could be lots of organizations have a pantry. But if you can just do a search for that, and if you can't get access to a computer, then maybe you go to a church or you go to a school. And you go ahead and you start talking to people and say, hey, listen, I just am under exceptionally poor circumstances right now, and I just need to find a pantry or some opportunity just to make sure I can get enough food so that I'm able to stay healthy and survive. And another important thing beyond just eating and getting a job is kind of your attitude. Now, Chris, he not only believed in himself. It's one thing to just believe in yourself and think that you're wonderful, but he never gave up. He was persistent. He continued fighting. And what did that mean? Well, that meant that he had to move a lot. He was constantly moving. He had to move from place to place. And he slept at times in the locked bathroom of a subway station. He slept outside. And he had his young son with him, and yet he continued. He continued to fight to support both him and his son, not just working, but also moving around, finding places, going to different shelters. There's always different shelters and opportunities, or maybe, again, you find a church that has some kind of shelter or short-term opportunity for you. But he never gave up, and he never said, you know what, I guess I'm just going to have to give up my son, or I guess I just can't do this. He just kept believing, he continued fighting, and he never gave up hope. And so Chris did all these things, but also, for as much as he did, he wasn't afraid that he could ask people for help at times. And ultimately, Chris was able to find a longer-term shelter for him and his son, actually by asking somebody who was at a church that ran a shelter for homeless women. So he ended up asking someone who didn't think that this person might necessarily be able to help, and it was probably a little embarrassing for him to ask if he could go to a shelter, but not just any shelter, a shelter for people of the opposite sex. But you know what? Sometimes you might have to swallow your pride in order to ask for help. It's not easy. I know it's not easy for me to ask for help at times in my life where I was really down and needed some help. But unfortunately, sometimes you just need to rely on the kindness of another. You need to do all the things that you need to do in terms of working and so forth and never giving up. But sometimes you just need to be able to reach out and say, hey, I need some assistance here. And Chris was able to do that, and it helped him tremendously. And so Chris ultimately, because of all these things, because he continued to believe, he never gave up. He made sure he and his son had meals regularly. He worked, and he worked incredibly hard. Chris became an enormous success. Chris is now a multi-millionaire. Not that that's the only thing that is a measure of success by any means. But Chris did a lot of things beyond that. He started his own business. He became a very successful stockbroker. And not only did he do that, but he actually gave a lot in terms of philanthropy. Chris remembered his roots and did a lot to support the shelter that had been a place for him and his son to live. And so Chris, remember, he succeeded. He made some money to support himself and his son. He became successful, but then he decided to give back. So Chris is really an amazing example that you absolutely can overcome homelessness. So if you're homeless right now and you're thinking, there's just no hope. I'm never going to get out of this. That is not true. That is not true. You can have hope. There's an opportunity for you to overcome your circumstances, but you're going to have to do the things that Chris did. Now, if you're thinking, well, maybe Chris is just some kind of exception. Maybe he's just a really bright guy, and is he the only one? And so, well, I just want to let you know that there are many, many people who have been successful that were homeless at one point in their life. For example, I was homeless. for an extended period when I was a teenager. When I was 17 years old, I lived in a tent for a brief time. When I was 17, so I was in a tent. I also lived in a pop-up camper. And I lived in a storage locker that I rented for $30 a month. And I slept on a cement slab in there. And I also lived for a time when I had a car. I lived in my car and used to park it at truck stops. And it wasn't an exceptionally fun period of my life, but I never gave up hope. Just like Chris, I continued to believe that just because I was in this situation, it didn't mean that there was anything wrong with me. It was just something temporary. It was something that I was going through, and I was just going to fight through, and eventually that I could have a future. And so today, I have 2 master's degrees, two masters. Not very good at penmanship, but I do have 2 master's degrees, and I'm a CPA. And I've done a lot to try and give back to others in terms of raising money for neglected and abused children and so forth. So, Chris is just one of many people. There's many people. There's a whole world of people who have been able to rise above their circumstances and go on to have a home, have a steady source of food and clothing, and have a family. And I want you to know that you too can rise above your circumstances. And terrible as it is right now, that you're homeless or about to become homeless or you don't have a permanent situation, I want you to know that you can do it. You can move forward and be successful.